Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. The family of George Floyd spent the day meeting with President Biden and Vice President Harris at the White House and with top lawmakers on Capitol Hill. The visits come 1 year after Floyd was murdered by a Minneapolis police officer. His death set off a summer of protests in the U.S. and abroad against police brutality. President Biden had hoped to have the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act passed by the 1-year anniversary of Floyd's killing. But lawmakers will miss that deadline. Bipartisan negotiations in the Senate are ongoing on legislation that already passed the Democratic-controlled House. Here's how Floyd's brother and young daughter pushed for change earlier.
People realize what's going on in America, and we all said enough is enough. We need to be able to set standard procedures in place, just like we need meaningful legislation. When they signed that George Floyd Policing Act, we need it on Biden's desk. The Senate, we need to get this taken care of. Because just like Gianna said, your dad is going to do it. And if a child can see that, we as adults, we all should be able to see that.
The talks across the aisle are being led by Republican Tim Scott, as well as Democratic Senator Cory Booker and Representative Karen Bass. Despite the missed deadline, they put out a statement reassuring that meaningful progress is being made. Up for debate are provisions that could ban chokeholds, fund body cameras, and create a national use of force database. Congresswoman Bass told our Nikole Killion the goal is to standardize policing in America.
You tell me a profession that has the power to take away your freedom and take away your life, but doesn't want any transparency, doesn't want any accountability, doesn't want standards, doesn't want accreditation. We need to bring policing into the 21st century. Policing needs to be elevated in terms of professionalizing policing so that there is national standards. 18,000 police departments, 18,000 ways of policing in America. Chokeholds okay in one city, not okay in another. So this needs to be standardized. That's why I think the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act is an important step forward, but it is not going to solve society's problems.
Nikole Killion, Meridith, McGraw, and Oma Seddiq join me now. Nikole is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Meridith is a White House reporter for Politico, and Oma is a politics reporter for Business Insider. Welcome to you all. Nikole, let me start with you. Is it clear when these negotiations could produce an updated bill, or what's in it so far?
Yeah, well, in terms of a timetable, obviously the negotiators don't want to set another deadline after they've missed another deadline. But that being said, they have all expressed a sense that this is starting to come to the finish line. You know, Congresswoman Bass has told me and reiterated in our interview that it could just be a matter of weeks. We also heard Senator Cory Booker tell reporters earlier this week that he thinks even a framework could be possible by the end of this week. And we know that they have been working around the clock on this. Senators Booker and Scott were working over the weekend on this. That's one of the reasons why Congresswoman Bass is here in town. Right now the House is out, but she stayed to continue to work and negotiate. So, you know, their hope is perhaps this can be resolved and that they can reach a compromise in the coming weeks. But that being said, what they won't negotiate in public are the details of this bill. And so, you know, you heard from Congresswoman Bass there. You know, she did describe to me today that, you know, she does feel certain components of this bill are important, whether that is banning no-knock warrants or chokeholds. And as far as the issue of qualified immunity, you know, she says that that is one of many issues that remains to be resolved, but she does still feel strongly that ending qualified immunity is important, holding individual officers is important, and she says that addressing qualified immunity will be addressed in this final bill.
Yeah, and Nikole, we keep hearing that word meaningful from those advocating for police reform, describing the change that they want to see. Here's more of your interview with NAACP President Derek Johnson on what exactly that means. Let's listen.
What is meaningful change to you? Well, police officers being held accountable, making sure there's public-facing federal registry of police misconduct so the society can have comfort that law enforcement officers who are serving their communities are not moving from agencies to agencies committing harm. To me, our rights would be alive today, but for us not having that publicly facing registry of police misconduct. We have to address 242 at some measure. Law enforcement officers shouldn't be operating above the law.
Nikole, are there 10 Republicans who will cross the aisle to back that sort of meaningful change?
Well, I think that remains to be seen. We do know that Leader McConnell has been very clear that he entrusts Senator Scott to broker a good compromise here and that he is the lead on this. And he does feel that the issue is important. We've also seen Senate Republicans like Lindsey Graham take part in some of these bipartisan negotiations over the last couple of weeks. So there does seem a willingness to at least embrace whatever comes out of this. But of course, the devil always remains in the details. And so I think that is a question going forward, that even if a deal is produced, will it be palatable to at least 10 Republicans to get this over the finish line? What I can say is, in talking to Congresswoman Bass today, she is very confident that at the end of the day, they will be able to get a bill to President Biden's desk to sign.
All right, Nikole Killion. Nikole, I know you have to get going. Thank you very much. Meridith, I want to turn to you now because we learned quite a bit about President Biden's upcoming travel today. Next week, he'll be visiting Tulsa, Oklahoma to pay tribute to the victims of the city's race riot 100 years ago. He's also heading to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin on June 16th in Switzerland. What is on the agenda for that meeting?
Well, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said their goal with this meeting with Putin is to, quote, restore predictability and stability to U.S.-Russia relations. But that's going to be a tricky task when it comes to Russia, especially because the Biden administration has continued to vow to hold Russia accountable for a series of confrontations. And the summit comes on a series of escalations by Russia. They've continued to build up troops on the Ukraine border. There was the SolarWinds hacking, the imprisonment of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. And Biden has imposed sanctions on Russia. He's expelled Russian diplomats. And then there was that tense back and forth with Moscow and Washington after Biden called Putin a, quote, killer, and they recalled one of their ambassadors. But I think one of the other things that'll be on the agenda in during their summit, of course, is the really unusual and disturbing event that we saw this week, where a dissident of one of Putin's allies in Belarus was intercepted on a passenger flight, and there was international outrage over that. But, still, despite all the tensions, they have found some middle ground on things like climate change and also on arms control. One of the first things that the Biden administration did was extend the New START nuclear arms treaty. And then he also did not impose sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline owners, something that was criticized by members on Capitol Hill. But, overall, I can't help but think back to, President Trump's summit with Putin in Helsinki. Trump and Biden have really taken very different approaches when it comes to handling Russia. And I think Trump's own summit will be looming over that, especially the moment where Trump sided with Putin and did not back his own U.S. intelligence on whether or not Russia interfered in the U.S. elections. And that's something that Biden has been incredibly outspoken against, pushing back on Russia and their interference in our own elections here.
Meridith, on infrastructure, the Republicans' counter-infrastructure offer coming Thursday shows them ready to increase their offer to about $1 trillion without raising taxes. How will that likely land?
Well, I think publicly the White House is willing to entertain this, but I think the divide remains so big between what the Republicans are coming back with, what they're expected to come back with on Thursday, and then, of course, what the Democrats are hoping for. And the White House press secretary said that while Biden would entertain these negotiations, but he had only signed off on this $1.7 trillion infrastructure package, and that's still so far away from the $1 trillion that the Republicans are expected to introduce. And I do think it's remarkable that there continues to be so much back and forth still over what the definition of infrastructure really is as these talks have continued. Senator Toomey, one of the Republicans who's working on these negotiations, said that there is still some unused funds that they could use. So there's still discussions even about where they're going to get the money for this. Senator Capito said that they would propose using some unused COVID funds, but of course that's not going to go over with Democrats. I do think everybody's sort of anxious, of course, to get something done. The Biden administration had an informal deadline of Memorial Day, and Schumer has talked about having something to vote on by July. And there continues to be some pushback too. Today, a coalition of industry leaders came out and pushed back against some of the tax hikes that have been proposed, saying that would ultimately hurt the job creators. So there continues to be lots of back and forth here. But right now, it's increasingly looking like Democrats in the White House will have to go at it alone.
All right. Meanwhile, Oma, you have been following the response to Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's now facing criticism from both parties for comparing COVID vaccine passports to the Holocaust. What's been the reaction?
That's right. So it's actually started out last week. At the end of the week, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene first compared mask wearing in the House to the Holocaust, and that was shortly after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi had reinforced, the House mask wearing rule on the House floor until all members and staff are fully vaccinated. So that was sort of Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene's argument against mask wearing, and she's elevated this argument over the days leading up to today when she once again compared vaccination efforts to the Holocaust, and this eventually led House Republican leaders, including House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy and the number 2 House Republican Steve Scalise, to condemn her language and condemn her statements. McCarthy called her comments wrong and appalling. And then you also have top Democrats saying the same. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said her comments are sickening, and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called her comments reprehensible. And so Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has yet to issue an apology, and she has yet to walk back her statements. Instead, she sort of doubled down her attacks on Democrats.
Well, earlier Tuesday, Greene retweeted, then deleted a supporter who insulted Minority Leader McCarthy with crass terms. Is she likely to face any more significant consequences from her party's leadership?
So their condemnation of her language today is significant because in previous times when Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has sparked controversy, House Republican leaders has sort of tiptoed around it. When she first started her term earlier this year, a series of her past social media activity came to light, including her elevating conspiracy theories such as that mass shootings at schools are staged events by gun control activists. And, she also endorsed acts of political violence on social media, including one specific post targeting House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. So this led House Democrats to rebuke Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene by stripping her from her committee assignments. House Republicans, for the most part, tiptoed around the issue, but it's clear now that it's fair to say that they've become increasingly frustrated with having to speak out against Greene or offer a reaction every time there's a fallout from her comments. So today's condemnation and their statements is significant, but it's unclear yet whether they'll take any further disciplinary action. Her legislative power has already been significantly limited by being stripped from her committee assignments. But you have at least one Republican lawmaker, Adam Kinzinger of Illinois, who has said that House Republican leaders should go further and remove her from the House Republican Conference. But it's unclear yet whether they'll take that action.
All right, we'll continue to watch it all. Meridith, McGraw, and Oma Seddiq, thank you both very much.